I thank the gentlelady, the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Bryant.
I thank the chair. The intersectional collision of President Clinton's deplorable conduct with our Constitution has set in motion this inquiry of impeachment. Each member must now match his or her action with only the authority the Constitution delegates to the House of Representatives. No more, no less. As such, we must not invent, for the purpose of expediency, a remedy which does not exist. The House cannot and should not be able to reprimand, censure, or fine the other two branches of government, the judiciary or the executive branches. Rather, members must be prepared to vote their conscience on whether or not to impeach, that is, to charge the president with an impeachable offense. This is our single role in this process. Further, impeachment is not a part of the criminal law. It's not governed by the rules of criminal procedure or court precedents, and not necessarily the rules of evidence. Impeachment is truly a unique constitutional process combining elements of the legal and political systems. Numerous scholars have come forward suggesting that not every crime is impeachable. Likewise, it's clear that an impeachable offense does not require a criminal law violation. The distinguished Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia has stated an impeachable offense does not have to be an indictable offense of the law. Before we begin our evaluation of the charges, let's be clear that the standard we must attain in this House before we can impeach is not, and I repeat, is not the same case as that against President Nixon in 1974. Some intimate that the Nixon case is the magic threshold, and anything less should not be considered for impeachment. That is simply, as the president's legal team put it, a misleading statement. Analogize this situation to the prosecutor in a law court who fails to indict the bank robber who robbed 5 banks because the prosecutor had previously indicted a robber of 20 banks. As for our own evaluation, our first task is to ascertain the facts. The second task is to determine if the facts support an impeachable offense. As for the facts, President Clinton was sued by Paula Jones in a civil sexual harassment case. In her case, Ms. Jones tried to establish a particular pattern and practice of behavior by the president. This was not unique to her case. Most sexual harassment cases have to establish such a pattern. After former White House intern Monica Lewinsky was listed as a potential witness, a series of illegal acts ensued. The evidence establishes the president engaged in the following misconduct in an apparent effort to prevent Ms. Jones from recovering a monetary damage judgment against him and to protect his presidency. The facts surrounding these unlawful events are, number one, perjury. The president, through a series of calculated lies over a period of months, attempted to evade, mislead, and provide incomplete responses to Paula Jones, the judiciary system, and the American people. Disregarding the recognized legal standard of a reasonable man used in all courts, the president repeatedly used verbal gymnastics to redefine words and phrases such as alone, is, and sexual relations. The latter interpretation, as admitted by his lawyer, results in the ridiculous conclusion that one party to a particular sex act may be involved in a sexual relation while the other party is not. And they also come into this high room and talk about how the president can give an incomplete answer and yet still comply with the oath he takes to tell the whole truth. Incomplete answer, whole truth, and give a misleading answer, yet tell nothing but the truth. And I'm still waiting for an answer how you can square those concepts. But if anybody can do it, I'm sure this president can. Number two, obstruction of justice. Once the question arose concerning an improper affair with Ms. Lewinsky, suddenly there was a series of incidents to cover the tracks of this affair, including ridding the immediate area of evidence in the Jones case and Ms. Lewinsky. While the president's fingerprints, and I use that in quotes, aren't clearly on these actions, almost by magic, the president is benefited by physical evidence disappearing from Ms. Lewinsky's apartment and reappearing under his personal secretary's bed. Ms. Lewinsky lands her long-sought job with a New York Fortune 500 company within 24 hours of signing a false affidavit supportive of the president in the Jones case. How lucky can one man be? Number three, abuse of power. Any claim the President has had that his affair was a private matter and at worst grounds for divorce changed when he brought the powers of his high office into play. The facts show that in the President's zeal to keep his affair from the Jones lawsuit, he allowed government-employed White House counsel, policy advisors, cabinet members, and communications team to defend him and perpetuate those lies. He continued to use his staff for a period of more than 7 months to deny Stonewall and to lie to those investigating his case. Now, we must use a common-sense approach to this evidence and look at the results. Look at the results of this series of calculations and incidents. Washington is a wink and nod community where people do not need to say exactly what they want in order to get what they want done. Nor can we judge each act in a vacuum. The context, the big picture, must also be considered. Just look at the timeline, look at the actions, and the results, which all benefit the one person who says he had nothing to do with anything. Throughout this process, we've also had the daunting task of determining whether these charges meet the standard of high crimes and misdemeanors, and whether the rule of law can be interpreted to include these offenses. Surely, one cannot seriously argue perjury and obstruction of justice are not impeachable. They're fraternal triplets of bribery, which is spelled out in the Constitution. Each of these have the same effect of thwarting the truth in our court system. As former Attorney General Griffin Bell has testified, the statutes against perjury, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering rest on vouchsafing the element of truth in judicial proceedings, civil and criminal, and particularly the grand jury. Professor Jonathan Turley of the George Washington Law School told Congress that the allegations against President Clinton go to the very heart of the legitimacy of his office and the integrity of the political process. For those remaining few who persist that this is merely a private or an example of trivial conduct, I draw your attention to the testimony before this committee of John McGinnis, a professor of law from the Benjamin H. Cardozo Law School. Integrity under law is simply not divisible into private and public spheres. It would be very damaging for this House to accept a legal definition of high crimes and misdemeanors that creates a republic which tolerates private tax evasion, private perjury, and private obstruction of justice from officials who would then continue to have the power to throw their citizens into prison for the very same offenses. In addition, Stephen B. Presser of the Northwestern School of Law testified before this Congress, they are not trivial matters having to do with the private life or thus impeachable. Let me start over on that one. They are not trivial matters having to do with the private life that are impeachable offenses. The writings and the commentary of the framers of our Constitution show that they would have believed that what President Clinton is alleged to have done, if true, ought to result in his impeachment and his removal from office. Harvard professor Richard D. Parker also stressed the rule of law in his testimony before us. Now consider another hypothetical situation. Suppose the president was shown to have bribed a judge in a civil lawsuit against him for sexual harassment, seeking to cover up an embarrassing evidence. As bribery, this act would be impeachable under the Constitution, despite its source as being the president's sex life. What is the difference, then, between lying under oath and obstructing of justice in the same judicial proceeding, to say nothing before a federal grand jury, for the same purpose? By analogy, both sorts of behavior would grossly pervert, even mock, the course of justice in the courts of the United States. And finally, when one wants to blame the Congress for all of this, and we hear that very often, I want to issue the reminder that it was President Clinton, and only President Clinton, who consistently made wrong choices instead of right choices, and who brought us to this point of national exhaustion. Also remember the additional words of Professor McGinnis about our forefathers and their paramount concern with the integrity of our public officials. Quote, they recognize that the prosperity and stability of the nation ultimately rest on the people's trust in their rulers. They designed the threat of removal from office to restrain the inevitable tendencies of rulers to abuse the trust. Could I have just 1 minute, Mr.
Without
Chairman?
objection.
Since these allegations were brought to the attention of the committee, my office has been inundated with phone calls and mail, and I've received an overwhelming number of calls in support of impeachment. But I look forward to the end of this debate, and I want my constituents back in Tennessee to understand I do not relish or this position I'm in or the opportunity to vote in this impeachment matter. It's going to be the toughest vote that I have to make as a congressman. There are no winners and there are no losers today. America has truly suffered, but the facts remain that our president has placed himself before the law and the nation. In conclusion, I would join the more than 100 newspapers and numerous other Americans to call upon the president to do the right thing and the honorable thing, to resign from the office of presidency. And I thank the chair.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Meehan.
The rule of law. We've heard much about it over the past few weeks, and we'll surely hear more about it over the next few days. Above all, we have rightly heard that the rule of law must apply equally to president and pauper. Otherwise, the law shall be the exception and not the rule. But in striving to fix the boundaries of the rule of law, we must not restrict our sights to the president. The rule of law must rule here as well. And there is one body of law, and only one body of law, that governs this committee's action when it meets to consider articles of impeachment: the Constitution of the United States. No, the law in this room is not Title 18, Section 1621 and 1623 of the U.S. Code, the perjury statute, but rather Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution of the United States. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. If we forsake this constitutional standard and the precedents in which it has been applied, let there be no doubt about it, our actions will be lawless. I have read the words of our founding fathers, and I have reviewed the precedents, and I am left to conclude that impeachable conduct is conduct which clearly, concretely, and convincingly demonstrates that a president lacks the capacity to govern, that a president is unable or unwilling to fulfill his or her core responsibilities or respect the boundaries of his or her power. I also have a good sense about what isn't impeachable conduct. Being a bad husband is not in itself impeachable conduct. Failing to live up to the expectations of those who elected you is not in and of itself impeachable conduct. And breaking a law is not in and of itself impeachable conduct. So we must ask ourselves, how does Bill Clinton's conduct reflect upon his capacity to govern? Let us start with what we've learned about Bill Clinton. We've learned that he's more reckless in his private life than we even imagined. Maddeningly reckless for someone with so much potential and so much to lose. We've learned that his instinct is to deceive when he's asked about his private recklessness, particularly when those doing the asking are linked to his political enemies. We've learned that this particular instinct to deceive carries into a judicial proceeding, though not without a competing instinct to act lawfully. What we see in Bill Clinton's sworn testimony are these two competing interests at war. I believe that that instinct to act lawfully was surprisingly successful in battle, given the strength of its enemy. Yet that war produced two casualties that we should all lament: forthrightness and clarity. And the lines might indeed have been crossed on occasion, most predominantly and prominently with respect to the president's testimony about precisely where he touched Monica Lewinsky. I disparage Bill Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky. I disparage what he did in his testimony, legal or not. I disparage what he said to the American people about this matter, and I disparage what he put this country through over the last 12 months. But can I conclude clearly, concretely, and convincingly from the president's conduct that he lacks the capacity to govern? Only if I willfully blind myself to the rule of life, a phrase I borrowed from Professor Lawrence Tribe. The rule of life teaches us that people are complex. They do wrong in certain contexts, yet forces behind that wrongdoing do not necessarily infect every context of their lives. Where they have erred, They sometimes come to realize it, regret it, and confine it. Branding a president who teetered on the edge of illegality and testifying about an illicit affair, a tyrant, or a traitor in waiting, clearly defies the rule of life. In fact, when I look at Bill Clinton's acts of governance, I see no failure to execute our laws properly or no lack of respect for the boundaries of presidential power. It also defies the rule of life to suggest that allowing the president to remain in office will result in diminished respect for the rule of law or the abandonment of morality. The American people are smart enough to know the difference between right and wrong, to realize that supposed role models who do wrong are models for nothing in those instances, to recognize that the president is already paying a steep price for his deception, and to understand that he remains subject to indictment and prosecution for any illegality he might have committed, whether we impeach him or not. Yet this committee nonetheless proceeds on a lawless path to impeachment, designed to arrive there on Saturday, December 12, 1998. And despite the awesome constitutional and practical significance of impeachment, we have been proceeding as if we're about to do anything but something exceptional. Material witnesses? None to be found here, even though there are multiple instances of conflicting testimony on critical issues. We instead appear to have embraced a new theory of jurisprudence, whereby the defense must prove its innocence to stave off punishment, or at least the burden shifts to the defense after the prosecution claims it has made out a prima facie case of some unrevealed charge. Accountable? Not us. We simply pass scandal on to the Senate, leaving it to the other body to do the dirty work of determining fact and meting out proportional punishment. Restrained? Only restrained from criticizing ourselves for having dumped a gratuitously salacious referral on the American people without even having read it first. I observed the polls indicating that the American people overwhelmingly oppose impeachment. Observe how we have conducted this impeachment inquiry, and I find myself suspecting that I am witnessing some grand scheme to convince the American people not to take this process seriously, to tune us out and let us commit a constitutional wrong without anybody noticing. For those who might hope for this outcome, let me say to you that whether or not the American people tune us in today or in the following days, history will not tune us out. The leading constitutional law treatise describes history's view of the 1867 impeachment of former President Andrew Johnson with the following words, quote, "The congressional attempt to oust Johnson was itself an abuse of power," end quote. I am sick at heart today, for I believe that similar words will come to characterize the actions of this committee and perhaps those of the House. Indeed, I fear not only how history will treat us, but how our actions will shape history. We lay the groundwork today for a startling precedent, a precedent by which private wrongs readily become grist for a reopening of elections, by which major constitutional clashes between executive and legislative branches are triggered by mere party line votes within the legislature, and by which the American people's views on what makes for a high crime and misdemeanor are flatly ignored. So I say to my colleagues outside this committee, who may not have made their minds up on whether or not to impeach the president, and are watching us tonight, it is not only this president and the nation's fate that hangs in the balance, but also the fates of presidents-to-be. 30 more seconds.
Without objection.
But also the fates of presidents-to-be and our fate in the eyes of history. Please, Save the Constitution from an overreach. Save our nation from a prolonged Senate trial. Save the House from the condemnation of history. And save history from this committee's excesses. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, every member of our committee recognizes that this is likely the most important vote we will ever cast, and all of us would prefer that the President's actions had not led us down this fateful path. However, we have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, and we must fully accept that responsibility. As a father of 2 children, I am deeply troubled by the events of the last year. My children, who were taught at home and in church and at school that honesty and integrity do matter, have witnessed the President of the United States shamelessly lie to the American people. As a member of Congress and as an attorney, I'm very troubled because every day in courthouses throughout this nation, Americans raise their right hands and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They do so under the penalty of perjury. Yet in this case, the President of the United States, the chief law enforcement officer of this land, has made an utter mockery of that fundamental precept. That is a travesty. No person stands above the law. All Americans, no matter how rich, how powerful, how well connected, should be held accountable for their actions. Every American must be held accountable. Back in 1972, I cast my first ballot in a presidential election. I was 19 years old, a college student. Like a majority of Americans that year, I voted for a Republican, Richard Nixon. 4 years later, however, I voted for a Democrat, Jimmy Carter. That decision stemmed from my profound disappointment over Watergate and a strong conviction that President Nixon should not have received a pardon, that he should not have gotten away with his actions. Since that time, I'd always hoped that our country would never again be confronted with an impeachment proceeding against an American president. But President Clinton's actions have again brought us to the brink of impeachment, and he has no one to blame but himself. The grand jury did not force the president to commit perjury. Judge Starr did not encourage the president to obstruct a lawful investigation. And in fact, this committee did give the president innumerable opportunities to refute the evidence before us. Instead, the president chose to run from the truth, justifying his lies with twisted definitions of is and alone. But despite President Clinton's linguistic contortions, the evidence is strong, convincing, and clear. The President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton, has engaged in a pattern of cover-up and deceit. Standing alone, each individual offense is extremely serious. Collectively, they're overwhelming. It has become clear to me that the president lied under oath before a federal grand jury. He lied under oath in a sexual harassment case, and he obstructed justice, and he abused his constitutional authority. Let me again review the facts. President Clinton lied to a federal grand jury. He lied about whether or not he committed perjury in a civil deposition and about the extent of his relationship with a subordinate government employee. President Clinton lied in a civil deposition in order to defeat a civil rights suit in which he was a defendant. He attempted to mislead the plaintiff's attorneys, relying on contrived cover stories and embracing false repetitions of, "I don't recall." He clearly did. President Clinton obstructed justice by encouraging others to lie in judicial proceedings. He sought to influence the testimony of a potentially adverse witness with job assistance, and he attempted to conceal evidence that was under subpoena. Finally, in constructing this cover-up, President Clinton used the power of his office to mislead, impede, and obstruct a federal grand jury, a civil deposition, and the American people. He used government resources, including government attorneys and staff, to disseminate his deceitful story to the public and to the grand jury. Back in 1974, Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, who served on the Judiciary Committee during Watergate, said that she would vote to impeach President Nixon in part because, and I quote, "The presidential cover-up is continuing even through today." We find ourselves facing a similarly unfortunate situation. To this day, President Clinton continues to deny and distort. He continues to dispute the undeniable facts before our committee and before the American people. The president refuses even to admit what several prominent Democratic members in this committee have publicly concluded to be true. President Clinton lied under oath. Several Democratic members of this committee have acknowledged that. The historic record, the law, and the Constitution tell us that the charges against the president do indeed rise to the level of impeachable offenses. They constitute serious violations of criminal law and fall squarely within our founding fathers' definition of high crimes and misdemeanors. Mr. Chairman, impeaching the president is an extremely serious matter. Throughout these proceedings, I've tried to keep an open mind, giving the president every opportunity to refute the facts that have been laid before our committee. But now, all of the evidence is in, and a decision is at hand. It has become apparent to me that impeachment is the only remedy that adequately addresses this president's illegal and unethical acts. Allowing the president's actions to go unpunished would gravely damage the office of the president, our judicial system, and our country. I have not reached this decision lightly. I have done my share of soul searching. I've listened carefully to the views of my constituents, and I've reviewed the evidence in excruciating detail, and much of it wasn't particularly pleasant, I can assure you. And I've been guided by our Constitution. In the end, the appropriate course is clear: impeachment. That is regrettably our only option. The argument has been made by the president's defenders that voting for articles of impeachment would set a terrible precedent. I respectfully disagree. To the contrary, burying our heads in the sand and refusing to acknowledge the gravity of the president's crimes would set a far more dangerous precedent. Giving the president a pass or a censure would set a dangerous precedent for future presidents, for those who testify in our courts, and for our children, whom we try to raise with respect for the truth and a sense of what's right and what's wrong. I ask my colleagues to search their hearts and answer this question: what message are we sending the youth of America if we abdicate our constitutional duty and allow perjury, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power to go unpunished? When we cast our votes, we are not voting as Republicans or Democrats. We are voting as Americans. Our allegiance does not lie with any one president, but with our country. Our charge is not handed down from any one political party, but from the Constitution. Every member of this body is duty-bound to put politics aside, follow our conscience, and uphold our oath of office. William Jefferson Clinton has disgraced the sacred office of the president. I've come to the conclusion that it is our duty to impeach. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Delahunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask each of you to imagine you've been summoned to defend yourself in court. You don't know what you're charged with because there's no indictment. The prosecutor has spent 4 years investigating your financial dealings. But when you get to the courtroom, he only wants to talk about sexual indiscretions. He sends the jury a 445-page report telling just his side of the story and releases thousands of pages of secret grand jury testimony to the public. He calls none of the witnesses quoted in his report, so you can't challenge their accuracy. In fact, he calls only one witness, himself. Then it turns out that he's never even met your chief accuser. The judge allows new charges to be raised in the midst of the trial, but then drops them. He warns that you will be convicted if you do not offer a defense. Then, when you do so, he tells you not to hide behind legal technicalities. The scene I've just described wasn't dreamed up by George Orwell or Franz Kafka. It's not a Cold War account of a Soviet show trial. In fact, it's similar to what's taking place here in America during the course of this impeachment inquiry. We are about to impeach the President of the United States on charges that never even would have been brought against an ordinary citizen. We have delegated our constitutional duty to substantiate those charges to an unelected prosecutor. We have called no witnesses to testify to the charges except the prosecutor himself. And he admitted he has no personal knowledge of the facts and never even met Monica Lewinsky. None of his witnesses were subject to cross-examination to test their credibility, despite the majority counsel, Mr. Schipper's statement that they should be. Having put before the public a one-sided case for the prosecution, some members of the committee have suggested that the president has the burden of proving his innocence. When he has attempted to do so, those same members have accused him of splitting hairs. We have required the president's counsel to prepare his defense without knowing what the formal charges would be. And we released articles of impeachment to the press before Mr. Ruff had even finished his presentation. At a hearing the other day, one of my Republican colleagues alluded to those he considers real Americans. To me, the real America is a land where every person, whether pauper or president, is accorded due process of law. Due process has nothing to do with legal hair splitting. It has everything to do with requiring those who wield the awesome power of the state to meet their burden of proof. That is what distinguishes this country from a totalitarian one. That is the genius of the Constitution, crafted by men who knew and understood the nature of tyranny. As former U.S. Attorney Sullivan testified, those who complain most loudly about such technicalities are the first to resort to them when it is they who stand accused. For weeks, members of the majority have cited the famous passage from A Man for All Seasons, in which Thomas More defends the rule of law against those who would cut down every law in England to get after the devil. More says, and I quote, "And when the last law was down and the devil turned round on you, where would you hide, the laws all being flat? This country's planted thick with laws from coast to coast, man's laws, not God's, and if you cut them down and you're just the man to do it, do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would blow then? Yes, I'd give the devil benefit of law for my own safety's sake." We would all do well to ponder those words, Mr. Chairman, for though we have invoked the rule of law, we have failed to embrace it. How can the American people accept our verdict unless they are satisfied we have conducted ourselves in as orderly, deliberate, and responsible a fashion as did the Watergate Committee in 1974, respectful of due process? Chairman Rodino did not proceed with the Nixon impeachment until it was clear that it had substantial bipartisan support. Chairman Hyde began these proceedings by observing that without such consensus, impeachment ought not go forward. Yet this has been the most partisan impeachment inquiry since the infamous trial of Andrew Johnson 5 generations ago. It is like a runaway train. Within the committee, some of us have attempted to apply the brakes, developing a respectful, though ultimately unsuccessful, dialogue with our colleagues across the aisle. Elsewhere, growing numbers of thoughtful Republican leaders, from Governor Rasko of Montana to Governor Rowland of Connecticut, have expressed dismay. Yet the train continues to gather speed. From my own perspective, this isn't even about President Clinton anymore. That he deserves our condemnation is beyond all doubt. But as President Ford has written, the fate of one particular president is less important than preserving public confidence in our civic institutions themselves. Article 2 of the Constitution provides a mechanism for removing our presidents. It's called an election, and it happens every 4 years. Whatever the founders meant by high crimes and misdemeanors, the one thing that seems certain is that impeachment should be reserved for situations in which the incumbent poses so grave a danger to the Republic that he must be replaced ahead of schedule. Last year, the House debated proposed term limits for members of Congress. One of the most respected leaders of the House led that fight against that legislation, choosing principle over party. In his speech, he said, and I quote, "The right to vote is the heart and soul. It is the essence of democracy. Our task today is to defend the consent of the governed, not to assault it. Do not give up on democracy. Trust the people." The author of these eloquent words is my friend, the Honorable Henry Hyde of Illinois. I remind him of these words today, not to throw them back at him, but because it seems to me that the consent of the governed is once more under assault, and we sorely need such eloquence again. The president committed serious indiscretions. In the effort to conceal his misdeeds, he compounded them, abusing the trust of those closest to him and deliberately, cynically lying to the American people. Knowing this, the people went to the polls on November 3rd and rendered their verdict. And it is illegitimate for a lame duck Congress to defy the will of the electorate on a matter of such profound significance. The voters did not condone the president's behavior, far from it. But they knew the difference between misdeeds that merit reproach and abuses of office that require a constitutional coup d'etat. Some have said we are just a grand jury whose only role is to endorse the prosecutor's conclusion that there is probable cause to indict. And don't worry, they say, the Senate won't convict. This view is both dangerous and irresponsible. Impeachment is not some routine punishment for presidents who fall short of our expectations. It is the political equivalent of the death penalty with grave consequences for the nation that all of us, Republicans and Democrats, so dearly love. We should not use the ultimate sanction. May I have an additional 30 seconds?
Without
Mr. Chairman?
objection.
We should not use the ultimate sanction when there is an alternative at hand. The joint resolution which my colleagues and I intend to offer, expressing our disapproval of the president's misbehavior and censuring him for it. If the president really did commit perjury or other criminal acts, the law will deal with him in due course. Our job is to safeguard the Constitution and the principle of popular sovereignty that is, in the stirring words of Henry Hyde, its heart and soul. There's still time to trust the people, Mr. Chairman. Let us do so before it is too late. I yield back and thank the chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Rothman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For 4 months now, this committee and the nation have struggled with issues at the very heart of our legal system: perjury, the rule of law, and impeachment. I have strived to keep an open mind, to study the historical precedents, to listen carefully to all who have spoken, no matter their party or political views, and to conduct myself in a manner that my constituents, history, and my children will respect. Now I must make a decision. I do not believe anyone should impeach the President of the United States without first discovering the truth. But while Judge Starr chose to submit a report charging the President with perjury, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice, the majority in charge of this committee never called even one of the witnesses who were supposed to have known the events firsthand. We did not hear from one of these fact witnesses. The college professors brought before us were not fact witnesses. Those convicted of felonies brought before us were not fact witnesses. There was not one person who could testify to what had actually happened in this case. Instead, we were forced to rely on Judge Starr's report, a series of portions of statements from a civil deposition, from people his staff chose to question before the grand jury, and Judge Starr's inferences and conclusions that he drew from all of these. None were ever cross-examined by the President's lawyers, even though there was a great deal of conflicting and ambiguous testimony given by each of those witnesses. David Kendall, Charles Ruff, the President's counsel, and Abby Lowell, the minority counsel, in their oral and written responses, rebutted and refuted each and every one of the charges brought by Mr. Starr. And so, with the facts thus in doubt, I firmly believe it was incumbent upon those advancing the impeachment of a sitting President of the United States to bring forth the fact witnesses, so that we on the House Judiciary Committee could hear them, see them, and most importantly, question them. Having the right to question and confront witnesses is an integral part of the very foundation of our American legal system, as is placing the burden of proof on those who are making accusations. I continue to hear from my Republican colleagues who say, "Why hasn't the President produced evidence exonerating himself?" Well, look back at your law books, my friends. The accused is not required to prove his or her innocence. To put the burden of proof on the accused, in this case President Clinton, not only corrupts the Congress's impeachment power, but subverts 200 years of American justice. Some argue that the House Judiciary Committee does not have to delve into the whole case. We can just ship it along to the Senate and let them get to the truth. They talk as if we were passing a bill to determine what the national flower should be. But what we are debating here is the impeachment of a sitting President of the United States, twice elected by the people. It strikes at the very heart of our Constitution and the balance of powers that has served us so well for more than 200 years. A balance of powers that has included a very high bar for the impeachment of a president, one which apparently the Republican majority now wishes to significantly lower. It is my opinion that a clear and convincing standard of proof must be met before the House Judiciary Committee and the House of Representatives can send an impeachment matter to the Senate. In the federal papers, the founders showed a very real fear that a Congress dominated by one political party could recklessly and for pure political benefit impeach the president of an opposing or the opposite political party without sufficient cause or proof, causing a terrible shock and disruption to the entire American political system. That is why the framers set the bar for impeachment of a president so high. They rejected such standards as maladministration and failure to demonstrate good behavior. Instead, they chose treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. According to most constitutional scholars, that phrase clearly meant offenses as serious a threat to the republic as treason or bribery. The president is not above the law. When he leaves office, criminal charges can be filed against him. And at any time, he can be sued civilly for his actions. So the world knows, and our children know, that the rule of law applies to all of us, even the president. And he will have to confront the consequences of his own actions. But our responsibility today is not to enforce the civil or criminal law. That is what the civil and criminal courts are for. Our job is to determine whether the facts in Judge Starr's case have been sufficiently proven, and if so, whether the Constitution then requires our president to be removed from office. With no fact witnesses to prove the charges, with no opportunity to question them, with no opportunity to get to the truth, the prosecution here has not met its burden. Therefore, I am compelled, and I will vote against the articles of impeachment against President Clinton based on Judge Starr's charges. But that does not end this matter. We must address the fact that in January of 1998, President Clinton wagged his finger and volunteered to us on television that he never had sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. The president was adamant and demanded that we believe him. At that time, he had no reason to rely on the narrow definition of sexual relations he believed he was held to in the Paula Jones civil deposition. He was not telling us the truth. He lied to us. While that lie does not rise to the level of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, the president's lie and his admitted adulterous behavior with Ms. Lewinsky in the White House demand our punishment. Only by punishing him for this conduct will we be able to look our children in the eyes and tell them that even presidents will be punished if they lie and conduct themselves with dishonor. I will cast my vote with a heavy heart. This is a sad moment in our nation's history. But I implore my colleagues to turn away from politics, turn away from shredding the Constitution with partisan shears, and from bringing our nation to the very brink of a constitutional crisis. Instead, turn and face history. Face the founding fathers and face the facts. Impeachment was never meant to be a political tool, nor was it meant to be a punishment for immorality. I implore you to reject impeachment and to preserve our Constitution. We must punish the president without punishing our system of government, our people, or our great nation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. That concludes the number of speakers for tonight. The committee stands in recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow.
And in just a minute, we'll begin taking your comments on today's House Judiciary Committee hearings. We've got the phone numbers on the bottom of the screen, and they're set up a bit differently than you might be used to. If you're for impeachment of the president, you can call 202-624-1111. If you're against impeachment, 202-624-1115. And if you're undecided, please reach us on 202-737-6734. We'll hear from as many different views as we can in this segment of Open Phones. First, a quick note on our schedule. Coming up in about 20 minutes, we'll be re-airing today's events, beginning with that presentation by the Democrats' lead counsel, Abby Lowell. Then at around 12:15 a.m., we'll hear from David Shippers, the Republican chief investigative counsel, and then members' opening statements on the articles of impeachment. All those will begin to re-air at 3:15 a.m. Eastern Time. And now to your calls. Due West, South Carolina, why are you for impeachment tonight?
Beg your pardon?
Why are you for impeachment, sir?
Because the man lied.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I think it should be put to the Senate, and then probably they'll do a full investigation themselves.
All right, thanks for the call. Atlanta, Georgia, why are you against the impeachment?
I would just like to say that I have heard the comments made by those who are for the impeachment, and I think that we are many of us are failing to see the big picture here, and that the president did lie, but I don't think that those are means to impeach him, and I think that many presidents have lied to the nation over the course of the 200 years for as long as our nation has been here.
All right, thanks. On the undecided line tonight is it Gahanna, Ohio?
Yes.
Tell us why you're undecided.
There's so many, all of the speakers are so compelling. And it's confusing to me how the Democrats can all be against and the Republicans can all be for. I need to get that straightened out of my mind.
Okay, thanks. From Kennewick, Washington, why are you for the impeachment? Kennewick?
Yes.
Tell us why you're for, please.
The man that holds the office of the presidency of the United States is one of the few men that take an oath of office to protect, defend the Constitution of the United States. I believe, under oath, he lied to the American public. Simple as that.
And Rochester, New York, you're against impeachment.
Yep.
Tell us why.
Well, it's the crime. What is the crime? What is the punishment? I mean, to impeach a president for a little lie about an affair, it's all quite silly.
All right, thanks for the comments. If you'd like to read the actual articles of impeachment that have been proposed, you can check our website. We've got the full text of them there. And you can also look at the Democrats' censure proposal, which was offered last night, made available to the press. Our website is www.cspan.org. Continuing to get your reaction to today's hearing. Next, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. You're undecided about impeachment. Why?
Well, actually, I'm actually for impeachment, but there's another way of handling it, I think, and I'm not quite sure if it's legal and not unconstitutional.
What would it be?
He is also the commander-in-chief of the military, and the military is now going through a big revolution with sexual misconduct. And seeing as how he is the chief executive and also the commander-in-chief, I can't see why they can't court-martial him, remove him as commander-in-chief, which then would make him unfit to be president.
Grand Prairie, Texas, you're next, and you're for impeachment. Please tell us about that.
Yes, I'm for impeachment primarily because we need to make sure that we send the people of this country the correct message. If we don't impeach, what message will it send the potential criminals, potential violators of the law? And we need to make sure that we maintain the sanctity of the oath, and that we need to be careful not to send the wrong message, because all of us are potential liars. And if we diminish or destroy the sanctity of this oath, we're going to destroy the sanctity of the judicial system of this country. And we need to make sure that we maintain that. On the other hand, if we do impeach, that is a question mark. The unknowns are innumerous. We don't know what it's going to cause, what is going to develop in the economy, what is going to do to the stock market, or the general welfare of the country. So we are in the horns of a dilemma.
Okay, thank you. Washington, is it Washington, D.C.?
That's correct.
And you're calling on the against line tonight.
That's right.
And why?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I am a progressive person. I am not a fan of Bill Clinton's, and I never have been. But I think the American people got what they wanted when they voted for him for president. And it strikes me that for the Republicans to talk about impeaching him for behavior that any rational person would have known always existed in Bill's character and someone who was popularly elected, it strikes me that that is no more or less than a coup d'etat. And under those circumstances, since I don't think it's a good thing to overthrow the will of the American people, I don't think he should be impeached.
Okay, thanks for the comments. The Democrats' counsel today, Abby Lowell, spoke for about 2 hours, made his presentation. In the afternoon, members heard from David Shippers, the Republicans' chief investigative counsel. He spoke a little less than 3 hours, and then we heard about 4 hours of opening statements from members. About 25 members in all got to speak. We'll hear next from Arlington. Is it Arlington, Virginia?
Hello. We're all greatly indebted to C-SPAN for broadcasting this on radio and on television.
Caller, are you calling from Virginia?
Arlington.
Arlington, Virginia?
Yes.
And you're on the for impeachment line.
I called on the undecided.
I'm sorry, undecided. And tell us why.
I wanted to say that I checked all the cable stations, the non-cable stations, and no one else is broadcasting this. So there are a whole lot of people out there who are not seeing this, and we're greatly indebted to you.
And caller, tell us why you're undecided about impeachment, please.
If I say one way or the other, I'm aligning myself with either side, which I think is politically, I don't want people to think I'm pro one way or the other, so I'd rather not say.
Okay. From Daphne, Alabama, this is a for impeachment viewer.
Pardon?
Are you calling on the for impeachment line?
I'm calling for impeachment.
And tell us how come.
Pardon?
Why are you for impeachment, ma'am?
Because I think he's pulled our leg long enough. He's a bad example for the future politicians that might be. I'm glad that we're going into a third party because he is one of the worst presidents we've had to set an example or to keep lying as he does. He lies constantly. He can't deceive us all the time.
Here's another view against impeachment. It's good evening, North Providence. Is that Rhode Island?
Yes, that is.
And tell us why you're against impeachment, sir.
Well, somebody was on television the other day that I was listening to, and somebody said there was a difference between perjury and lying. Be that as it may, I think he has to answer to his wife, his daughter, and to his God. But I think it would throw the country into turmoil. What he did, obviously, was morally wrong. But impeachment, I don't think, is the answer to all of this. I think all should be put behind us, period.
Okay, thanks. Coming up in about 10 minutes, we'll begin re-airing all of today's hearing, including the presentations by the minority and majority counsel and the beginning of opening statements by members. If you'd like to view any of it, it starts in about 10 minutes here on C-SPAN. Also, you can click on our website and look at the video and audio of today's House Judiciary Committee hearing. We also have it indexed by speaker, and you can access it that way. Our address on the web is www.cspan.org. And by the way, the website also has the proposed articles of impeachment and the Democrats' censure resolution for you. To Gurney, Illinois, on the for impeachment line, please tell us why you have that position.
Well, I believe that when the president went into the courtroom and was sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and then knowingly and willingly lied in his testimony, not only was he breaking the law blatantly, but he was also setting a terrible example for our children, which he cares so much about. I have 2 small children, and how can I teach them to tell the truth and have respect for our country and the laws when the president of our country doesn't believe that?
Okay, from Montgomery, Texas, why do you fall in the undecided category?
Well, I'm leaning toward against, but generally undecided. The idea that personal, legal, consensual sexual behavior be the subject of government punishment is, I think, rather medieval and theocratic. Secondly, a lie which produces great good, unless even under oath or out of oath, cannot be wrong. For example, lying to save the life of an innocent person or child. And to take the position that all lies are absolutely equally evil is insane, and I don't think believed by anybody. My last comment is the entire process is, I would describe as sophistry run amok. Perhaps we have too many lawyers in government. I think I'm finished now.
Appreciate the comments. You can see members of the House Judiciary Committee staff continuing to clean up and set the room up for tomorrow. Debate will resume at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll have live coverage here on C-SPAN. It'll begin, we expect, with the rest of the opening remarks from the 12 members of the committee that didn't get to speak tonight. 12 members at about 10 minutes each. That's about 2 hours. And then we could hear the beginning of debate and amendments, perhaps, and then votes on articles of impeachment that could continue into Saturday, possibly. And if any article of impeachment is approved, there would be a special House session to consider that. We've heard it would be late next week and perhaps happen on Thursday. Next, we'll continue to hear some of your thoughts about today's activities. Panama City, Florida, why are you against impeachment?
Well, because I do believe that a lot of people do not understand the repercussions that will follow from this. And as Maxine Walters put it, it is about our people, and I don't think she said that with any boundaries.
Okay.
Is that a good reason?
I appreciate your comments. To Birmingham, Alabama, on the undecided line.
Hi. I'm undecided because I just really don't think there's anyone in line to step up and do the job as well as Bill Clinton. If there was someone that could handle this job as President of the United States, I would more than likely be for impeachment. It's just a bad time.
For impeachment tonight, Algonquin, Illinois.
That is correct.
And tell us your reasons.
I am for impeachment because he is the commander-in-chief of our great nation. He had every opportunity to come forward, come straight to us since Tuesday, and he brought his counsel instead. And I think if he was man enough, he should have went on TV and said it over and over again, what he did. Therefore, I think impeachment is no doubt in a lot of people's mind, whether it takes a tailspin for our economy for a little bit, or people, Republicans or Democrats that vote for, do not get reelected. It's what counts. He's the commander-in-chief. He cannot lie to his country and his people.
Arlington, Virginia, you're against impeachment. How come?
I am appalled at what's going on right now. I don't think there are any reasons that what I can see, and I've been watching very diligently, that there are reasons for impeachment. I'm not for what President Clinton has done. I mean, nobody is. But I cannot see any reason, other than political problems here that are going on. I think it's ridiculous.
And here's an undecided view from Moab, Utah. Tell us about your thinking.
Yes. Well, I've been watching these hearings, and I'm very undecided because I was involved in a civil suit where somebody perjured themselves. They lied, and I lost the suit, and it doesn't seem to me like, I don't know that it was material or not. Now that I'm hearing all this lawyer talk, it probably wasn't. But for me, I just don't know that he did anything impeachable. It was in his personal life. It was something, he came on TV and told us that he did it, So I don't think anybody's really actually said that before, that he admitted that he did wrong. And he's told us, and they keep saying that he hasn't told us enough. Well, I think he told us enough. He knew he did wrong. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments. To California, you're for impeachment?
Hello?
California, you're on the air. Tell us why you're for impeachment.
I am for impeachment. Definitely.
And why?
And the sooner the better. He's been in there way too long the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
He has caused disaster to this country. We are hated around the world because of the things he's done. He has made a laughingstock of the presidency. He has not only done that, he has sold out our military and downgraded it, has done nothing to keep it up, but sent our soldiers away to other countries to be peacekeepers instead of soldiers, what they're trained for.
And from Connecticut, here's an opposing view. You're against impeachment. Tell us how come.
I'm against impeachment because I believe that they would be lowering the bar for impeachment to a level that's going to create problems in the future. If you think about it, we could have impeached President Bush, we could have impeached President Reagan, and where will it stop? I think it's an abuse of authority to try to remove the president because they couldn't do it in an election.
Time for a couple more calls, and we'll begin to re-air today's hearing, starting with the opening remarks from Chairman Hyde as they consider a procedural matter. We'll get to see that in just a few minutes. Meantime, more of your comments on the undecided line. Here's Kansas City, Missouri. Good evening.
Yeah, I was talking about the bipartisanship.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an independent, and I as far as the Democrats saying that everybody's on the Republican side is is partisan, I don't believe that.
Well, let me ask you, how do you think this should turn out?
Well, I think I'm starting to think that he should be impeached.
Okay, thanks for the comments. Lawton, Oklahoma, you're also for impeachment, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Tell us why.
Okay, I'm retired military. I served 21 years in the Army, defending the Constitution and doing what's right. And I believe that the man lied under oath. Now, if that was me, I would have went to jail. We've had generals dismissed. We've had them relieved for sexual misconduct, and the president is not above the law. What really gets me is, I don't know if anybody remembers, but I watched a program one night where President Clinton was in a conference, I believe, with a bunch of religious people. And there was a black preacher saying a prayer, and President Clinton was standing behind him. Now, I watched all of that, and all of a sudden, President Clinton opened up his eyes, and I wonder why. Why didn't he close his eyes in prayer, but he opened up his eyes and looked at the camera? Right then and there, I knew